few words in English before we start. Grazzi tal-li ġejtu dawn il-kondizjoni just some words in Grazie tal-li ġejtu dawn il-kondizjoni mhux normali, il-fatt il-numru ta' nies li setgħu jiġu wkoll ta' miżuri kollha li jeżiġu mill-awtoritajiet tas-saħħa. Once again, I thank all those present here today for their courage in showing up, even though that we have to abide by very strict health restrictions. I also thank those who are joining us through Facebook Live to this discussion of our latest publication, which is about the Adorata Cemetery. This morning's discussion is between three friends and colleagues. Perhaps colleagues in my sense, because I'm unpublished. But the book, The Adorata Cemetery, is edited by Professor Conrad Tate, and then contributions by Mario Borsch, who's present on his right, and Dr. Mark Salvana, who's on his left. Apart from these contributions, I would like to add also Mr. James Leafay, whose contribution was a chapter on the preservation, on the monument, and the way forward in its management. And also, the book is illustrated by superb photography done by Dr. Charles Paul Zokwari. Having said all this, and not to divulge more at length, I'd like to ask Conrad, what is the importance of the center, the Adorata Cemetery, in the Maltese historical architecture and history?
Well, Paul, thank you for coming here this morning. Certainly, the Adorata Cemetery complex is, I would say, finest, an open museum, basically, of the best artistic endeavors of the 19th century, be it in architecture, be it in sculpture, decorative arts, where we have an opportunity to view an entire setting, basically. I mean, obviously the setting of a necropolis, city of the dead, Polis meaning city, necros of the dead. But here we have a whole wide range of artistic movements, starting from basically revivalist styles, neo-Gothic, neoclassicism, historic styles that emerged towards the third quarter of the 19th century, all the way to the Second World War and beyond. So the finest architects can start, obviously, this is the magnum opus of Emanuele Luigi Galizia, conceived the whole cemetery. I mean, Galizia was a master of cemetery design. He not only designed the Adorata, but he had also previously designed the Tabraxa Cemetery, and later on designed the Ottoman Muslim Cemetery close by in Marsa. But we see the works of various architects later on, ranging from Giorgio Costantino Schinas, Andrea Vassallo, Gustavo Vincenti, his son, Ludwig Galizia, Nicola Zambit, so a wide range of architects and artists, sculptors like famous Francesco Saverio Ciortino, who basically there are several sculptural funeral monuments of Ciortino. And obviously from the inauguration of the cemetery in 1869, the cemetery consolidated and in a way flourished in terms of artistic merits. I would say it's important to put this in a bit of context. The Adorata Cemetery was one of the first extramural cemeteries. Now, it wasn't exactly the first. By extramural, we mean burials before used to take place within the confines of the parish, either within the underground vaults, in the area, the margin of the church, or church graveyards or tombs, but not outside the boundaries of the parish per se. The only exceptions to that was when there were plague cemeteries. When there were epidemics, obviously there was a great fear of contamination. So plague cemeteries, yes, those were located way outside the countryside. Initially, the church, and I'm talking about the church, the Catholic Church in Malta, had resisted having extramural cemeteries. And the idea was that they felt that since even the notion of certain doctrine principles like redemption, purgatory, it was very essential that the burials took place in close proximity to the church where services are held. But we know that in the 19th century, and I'm sure Mario will elaborate on this, particularly in France, there were various movements due to Napoleonic reforms that in the interest of public health, there should be cemeteries that are located outside the developed areas, okay? To prevent problems of contamination and any dangerous perils to public health. In the 1850s, the British governor at the time, William Reid, had an issue at hand that cemeteries, burials of those who were not Catholics had become problematic. By the time, obviously, there was a garrison regiment, British regiment stationed in Malta. Most of these were not Catholics. The Sita Bastion Cemetery, which up to that time had served for the burial grounds of those who were not Catholics, was totally exhausted in terms of space. So we needed to build a new cemetery, and yet there was a multi-faith cemetery. And this was the first extramural cemetery, Tabraxia. The church, the Catholic Church, resisted that because the church had remained strict on the principles that Catholics should be exclusively buried within Catholic burial grounds. So although technically speaking, Tabraxia was a multi-faith cemetery, there was nothing that prohibited Catholics from being buried there. De facto, it ended up as being a cemetery for all those who were non-Catholics. Jews were buried in Jewish cemeteries, Muslims had their own cemetery. So you ended up like Church of England, Lutherans, Calvinists, Greek Orthodox, Russian Orthodox, you name it, the whole kind of spectrum of those Christian denominations, not Catholics, were buried there. So that was the first extramural cemetery that was accepted. By the time the church had kind of warmed up to the idea, but subject to certain conditions. One of the conditions laid out was that the cemetery, the Adorata Cemetery, needed to have one of the prerequisites for the church to approve this concept. I mean, this was going to be, in a way, the national cemetery because the vast majority of the population were Catholic at the time, was that there had to be a church. So this idea was that there was a church where religious services held at least once a day. In fact, the Adorata Church was managed by the Capuchins. So in a way, there was someone praying for the souls of the dead. So in case you ended up, you were in constant torment, purgatory, you was in the forgotten. Okay, this is the idea that if there wasn't a church, there's a danger that it might be totally forgotten. So at first there was even resistance against people kind of taking up burial spaces and what was originally wasted. The first idea was, the first site that they were considering to have the first cemetery was on the Jesuits' Hill, where there was the power station. But that was, the Jesuits' Hill was then ruled out because the military authorities vetoed it. They said, no, that is strategically important land, and we cannot afford to have a cemetery there because we needed for the military defenses of the island. And the Talhor Hill, the location of the Adorata Cemetery was known as Talhor Hill, was then considered as the best alternative, since, first of all, it was, relatively speaking, wasteland, not rich agricultural land, and it was on a nice incline, on a slope, and it was relatively in close proximity both to Valletta and Floriana, and the three cities which were the most densely populated areas. So in that case, its location, serving the two, was ideal. And so once that was established, Galizia was commissioned, engaged to prepare plans. We know we prepared a model of the cemetery. Obviously, the big challenge here, and this was a much bigger challenge than its previous cemetery at Abraxa, which was much smaller and on flat ground, was how to incorporate, how to design the layout on a slope. So, I mean, when you visit there, you can appreciate the embankments, the pathways, the carriageways. He was sent on a study tour to England and France, and he had the opportunity to visit and examine a number of cemeteries there. In fact, one of them was the Nord Cemetery in Paris, and commentators said that the current cemetery was closely modeled on the Nord Cemetery. It's a claim that Galizia denied when Nicolas Amit mentioned this. Obviously, probably Galizia must have felt a bit miffed that, you know, there might have been an illusion that they copied it from the book. But obviously, influences certainly were possibly derived from it. And he planned a number of ways of planning the cemetery. He was obviously very much conscious of not only, I mean, in a way, he wanted to conceive this of a garden cemetery. The aspect of nature was very important. And we have to appreciate that by this time, in the 19th century, the concept of representation of death had changed dramatically from the Baroque era to the British colonial period to the 19th century. Whereas in the Baroque times, death was always portrayed as something to be terrified of or very afraid of, and you have depictions of skeletons launching at you with spikes and skulls and winged hourglasses, your time where it is expired. So something bold, something terrifying, something that instills fear in you. In the period of Romanticism in the 19th century, that was projected as a natural part of the cycle of life. You are born, you grow, you reach, attain mature age, and then sleep is an extension, and death is almost an extension of death. So even the iconography that we see, particularly in the Russian at the Adorata, represents a rather docile and tranquil way. That is not something that is to be terrified of. Obviously, since it's a Catholic cemetery, there's this idea of redemption, resurrection. I'll stop here for the time being to allow Paul to Mario. Just a little thing about the book. The book is made of a number of contributions. Mario Borch had dedicated 2 very extensive dissertations on the Adorata Cemetery, the history of our department, so a large amount of research is due to the works of Mario. Mark wrote a lot about the decorative arts aspects of material culture. Then we had basically James Licari from the restoration and management point of view. And then we have Dr. Charles Palazzopardi for the follow.
I'll show. Mario, could not mention or just on the extramural law.
Yes.
Very well. Can you give a broader view of the implication and the development of the Adorata on the basis of this new law at the time?
Yes. Well, with respect to the whole idea and the importance of creating extramural burial is linked with the idea of sanitation, of health. And Prior to the Maltese sense of urgency in this matter, we had already had France experiencing this in the late 18th century. Père Lachaise, maybe a number of us have been there. Today it's within the Parisian confines. In those days it was extramural. Was built and officially opened in 1804, purely because of this reason. The idea of segregating the living from the dead, the metropolis from the necropolis, all because of this miasma, this contaminated air, this bad air, which would sicken the living as a result, of course, of decomposition and inadequate sanitary measures. So, as a result of this wave, this time incorporating even the government, because prior to this, burial was very much linked with ecclesiastical authorities. Now we have a very different understanding of them, which is an idea of creating a welcoming place in order to encourage people to distance themselves from the security, from the protection, so to speak, of the church in the afterlife. In 1869, so now I'm jumping from 1804 to 1869, after a series of struggles between Maltese authority, ecclesiastical authority, the British, as Conrad mentioned with the Tabroxia Cemetery, which originally had been intended to be the national necropolis, but because of this dispute, how dare you, how can you insist that Roman Catholics be buried next to Protestants? This was the outcry in the 1850s, and as a result of which this new location, which Conrad mentioned, had to take place. There have been attempts in other countries in Europe. So we see places such as Kensal Green in London in 1832. We have West Highgate, also in London in 1839. We have the Glasgow necropolis, and we also have other areas in Europe which are starting to shift into this direction purely for the sake of sanitation. This time, the governing body over these larger necropoli will be the government and the church. So in Malta, when eventually the location was chosen and the whole place was constructed, taking around 7 to 8 years for it to be finally fully functional, 1862 to 1869, although first burials happened a bit later, we have this Ordnance Act 11 of 1869, Article 36, which basically stated that it was only the bishop, parish priests, and cloistered nuns who, after this date, were allowed to be buried in their own, wherever they chose, so to speak. The nuns obviously in their own cloistered monasteries, parish priests perhaps in the parish, and the archbishop wherever, in Dina, wherever, Valletta. So everybody else had to follow this new law. To entice people to move into this direction, there were some treats, so to speak. So, firstly, anybody who had already owned burial vaults within the church itself or the church confines, in earlier years, the parvis, the tzuntir, used to be even used for burial, were given vaults at the Addolorata for free, in bartering, in exchanging. Okay? there was a lodge, specifically one of the two entrance lodges that we see when we enter into the Addolorata. That was the friars, the monks' lodge. And so Capuchin monks were placed there permanently, and they would have shifts, so to speak, but there would constantly be somebody there day and night, so that every day there was Mass said in repose of the souls of the dead. This was essential for a Roman Catholic Maltese who had to be literally pulled away from the city to eventually, as a corpse, to be taken to this necropolis, far away from the confines of the living. It is sort of approximately equidistance, this Stalbor, between the three cities and Valletta and its suburb Floriana. So, in those cities, absolutely no burial was to take place anymore. There were incidents of epidemics, I should say, whereby people would be buried in the crypts of existing monasteries. For example, in Valletta, the Dominicans, there was a very interesting case whereby, as a result of decomposition, the entire, let's call it in those days, the suburb, okay, would get infected, and several people, as far as 67 people, died. So they had to stop this spread of contagion. Sanitation wasn't fully understood, how to keep the coffin, how to prevent the putrefaction to spread its germs and everything. So this had to stop. One big pressure had been this: constant epidemics taking place within the cities during the 19th century as a result of decomposing corpses. Okay? So these bells were also rung for free with the arrival of a corpse at the new Addolorata cemetery. I think that would have been sort of this one last thing I want to say, but this didn't happen, well, in a way, it's a kind of thing we fail sometimes to mention. Remember that between 1798 and 1800, Malta was under the French. And in those 2 years, Napoleon had already stated that on the island there was to take place mixed burial rites at all costs. Of course, then with the short term of the French in Malta being over paving the way for the British, this concept had to wait for another 69 years.
Thank you, Mark. The development of the Addolorata cemetery happened towards late in the late 19th century. How does it fare in the movement of the European decorative art?
So my approach, my perspective in the book discusses the decorative arts. So there are many perspectives from which you can look at the cemetery, but I truly feel and I believe that if there's a place in Malta where you can truly feel the spirit of the 19th century, the romantic spirit, the revivalist spirit, the eclectic approach to architecture and design, as Hunter has said before me, this is a huge open-air museum of fine, very fine architecture, of funerary monuments, which in the book are discussed by Mario. So the 19th century is the period when the decorative arts, so when we talk about the decorative arts, we talk about design and ornament, and the application of ornament and decoration. This is the period which sees the emancipation of decoration. Decoration in the previous centuries had always been considered as a minor art, as applied art. But in the 19th century, through a lot of writing as well, writings of great geniuses like Pugin and Ruskin and William Morris and Gottfried Sander and many others, Now decoration started to be seen as another important process of creativity. And in the 19th century, we have a full, constant development of different styles, which actually had already started in the 18th century with neoclassicism. And Romanticism is essentially, in art especially, this nostalgia for what is far away, for what is distant, in time and place. And therefore, this is behind the revivalist attitude, which had already started in the late 18th century, which is consolidated in the early years of the 19th century. Neoclassicism, you have the Gothic revival, and especially because Malta was now a British colony, and because the Gothic revival had been given a strong push in England through the great genius Augustus Welby-Moore or Pugin. So we now see it also being born in Malta. You have the Renaissance revival. You have the Baroque revival. The Romanesque revival. So, and then in the last lap of the 19th century, all these revivalisms will come to what we call eclecticism, in which artists could inspire themselves from different styles. And this was also facilitated. You have to remember that the 19th century is also the century of the great exhibitions. The Great Exhibition of London of 1851, the Exposition Universelle de Paris, which followed, and other great exhibitions which were held later on in the century in Vienna and in Turin and other places. So if we are to look for a place in Malta which truly, and a large place, we're not talking about one single church, but a complex of works of art, of monuments, of chapels, which truly reflect the 19th century and the attitude to decoration. It is at the Adorata Cemetery. So the Adorata Cemetery is truly that place which places Malta on the international map. Mario has already mentioned very important cemeteries around Europe, Père Lachaise, Montmartre, Montparnasse, Kensal Green, Highgate Cemetery. The ones in Italy, the Salieno Cemetery, the Verano Cemetery in Rome. Wherever you visit these great cemeteries, you can see the same approach. And therefore, Malta, through the Addolorata, especially the early period, so from 1870 till the Second World War, okay, that bracket, before you have the start of contamination from the mass-produced monuments, but that will come, unfortunately, later. But the early phase is truly marked by this very fine approach to decoration. And as you enter the cemetery, not only in the structure is truly Galicia's greatest and finest moment. So the structure is Gothic revival, and I truly believe that Galicia might have even had the publications of Pugin in its time, because in 1841, Pugin had published the true principles of Gothic or pointed architecture. And in this book, which was tremendously influential, there is the prototype for the typical Gothic revival church. And the church which Galizia built at the Addolorata is actually almost taken literally from Pugin. So I wouldn't exclude, so this is just a hypothesis, there is nothing to show for this, but obviously when we talk about art and art history and architecture and decoration, we apply what we call stylistic analysis. So we look at the styles that we compare, let's say. So from a comparison between Fujian and Galizia, you can see that there is a great affinity, a very intimate affinity. And then as you went there, you can, as you go around the passages and the chapels and the funerary monuments, you can see all this mix of good design. So you get monuments and chapels which are built in the neoclassical style, others which are in the Gothic revival, others which are in the Renaissance revival, others which are a mix of different ideas. And because this is truly the late 19th century. And something else, apart from being the century of the cemetery, as has been said, and the cemetery of the Great Exhibitions, it was the century of very important design publications, including two which were very important. The Grammar of Ornament, which was published soon after the Great Exhibition in 1856 by Owen Jones. This becomes like an encyclopedia of design. And in the 1860s, there was the French equivalent of this, Racinet, Lordemont, Polychrome. So this facilitated the way how design ideas could be disseminated across Europe, and also arriving in Malta. And remember, Malta was a British colony, and despite the fact that there was the involvement of the church and this was a Roman Catholic cemetery, but remember that this was a colonial commission. This was commissioned by the colonial government, and we are in the 1860s in the Victorian age. So the cemetery truly is a reflection not only of the 19th century, of the spirit of the 19th century, but it is also a true reflection of the Victorian age.
Thank you, Mark. Conrad, before you close your contribution or your part of the discussion, you spoke also about how the book is made up. Can you give us a brief or more of the book?
Okay. When my first intervention, I hinted that the book is composed of a number of chapters or sections that start off with the historical, political formation of what led to the establishment of the cemetery, giving the kind of backdrop at that point, and then basically it moves on to separate appraisers. Mario writes about the funerary chapels, and there's another section on the freestanding monuments and sculptural monuments. There's the chapter on decorative arts, could range from raw tiling work to stained glass to decorative ornamental stonework in buildings. And then there's another section, the last section, that deals with aspects of restoration and management plan for the cemetery, things relating to the nature, fauna, ecological system as well. We have to remember that this is not only obviously it is distinguished not only for its artistic and architectural merits, but there's also very rich, thriving. It's a garden. It's the green lamps for the area as well. So there is another aspect of as well of kind of more in terms of the ecology aspect. There's a short piece that I write as well about modernity and deaths, about 3 or 4 funerary monuments from Richard England's work as well, to try to have, although the book primarily is historical, but I thought it would be interesting as well to have some examples of contemporary, modern, more recent funerary monuments. There's an account of the funeral of Chevalier Emanuele Luigi Galizia, the architect of the cemetery. We also used extensively original drawings from the National Archives of Santo Spirito in Malta, where there are, in all, we couldn't obviously reproduce all of them, but various original drawings that were submitted by the architects, designers, for the approval of the committee that would approve what would be built. And Galizia served for a number of years as the person who would either approve or reject design. So there are these beautiful watercolor washes and drawings of various monuments, and those, we have a good selection of those. From even those, some proposals were never executed. Like one of them is a beautiful design by Nicola Salmit for a chapel and various spaces for the confraternity of Cospicuo. Whereas there is also what is known as the Zuntertal Isla, which is the burial ground that had been acquired by the parish church of Saint-Lin. So, besides the archival documents, and then, so there are all these sub-chapters, drawings, and documents, and then towards the end, there's a very extensive portfolio of plates, monochromatic plates in black and white by Dr. Charles Palazzo-Pardi, which capture the beauty, the qualities, the photogenic qualities of these chapels and monuments and details. I also forgot to mention, but equally important, there's a good introduction by Professor Mario Mohajar, who talks about the importance of the cemetery in this context. So it's quite a voluminous book. It is not the kind of enterprise that any scholar or academic would try to do single-handedly. It would have been impossible. So it actually is a collective effort of the five of us, and thanks as well to Mitzi Books and to Joe in particular, who had faith in this project. And this is the third in a series of books on historic cemeteries in the 19th century. The first one was on the Ottoman Muslim cemetery in Marsa. The second was on Tabraxia, I wrote with Janka Mohajar, who was a graduate of the department. And the third one, obviously, is the most challenging, the most extensive. Now, I have to say something that, going back to Mario's work way back 10 years ago, what, 20 years ago, well, the germination of all this research, well, Mario at the time was still a student at the Department of Art History, or History of Art as it was known at the time. You had done your first degree and then your master's on your cemetery. And since that time, then in the department, we've been emphasizing a program on the visual culture of death last time, the connection between representation of death and art in all its forms. So that is consolidated. So I think this series, and this book in particular, makes a useful contribution to the artistic appreciation of cemetery design, which after about 10 years ago was relatively new for Mario's work, and after that uncharted territory. Makes us appreciate that these are places that we should preserve, enjoy, and even possibly consider and go abroad. These are part of even cultural tourism, where if you go to the necropolis in Glasgow, you see tourists, visitors walking by on tours, appreciating these. I think it is something that is still not as valued. I mean, what pains me sometimes, maybe a bit of a controversial point, is you look at some of the military cemeteries in Malta, and these are really well maintained by the Association of Commonwealth Graves Foundation. They take care of them, they really keep them in good condition, and they're kept clean, well maintained. There are, they receive donations from all over the world. Yet, there are most of these are burials of people from military, military ranks. And then our own national cemetery, you see a scrapyard opposite, just opposite the cemetery, broken pavements, rubbish cans in the form of rusty drums, chapels of illustrious people like Serenity Dingley, with shrubs growing on the roof and stonework dilapidated. I mean, the memory of our forefathers, descendants, we should take pride in this. We cannot allow such an important complex to be left basically to its own decay. And I think we have to really take pride in this, maintain it, because at the end of the day, we're paying respect to ourselves and our own families.
One of the outstanding features of the Andorra 79 feast and his monuments or the Fusilier Chapel. Can you elaborate on these?
Yes. In general, the 19th century cemetery is a very special cemetery. I always, since I was, I think this love grew in me since I was very young, and I remember way back, I can't even think of how old I was. I remember my mother took me to this place because of a funeral, very vague memory, very long time ago. And I remember falling in love with this place at first sight. I remember walking up one of the carriageways, holding her hands, looking at all these wonderful little houses, so different to the houses that you normally see in your streets. And I just had this sudden love for this place. I was lucky enough when I went to do my History of Art first degree to be able to work on this project, which was a very pleasurable experience, albeit a bit too long, because it took me about 5 years plus, always walking in and out of the place. The 19th century cemetery is a very, very special place because of its romanticism, the way that the horrors of death were modified, softened, to turn death into a sense of everlasting sleep. And to incorporate, to inculcate this feeling within us, architecture had a very important role. This idea of the revivalisms that were taking place, most notably Neoclassicism and Gothic revival, were very contributory to this thing. And in general, although when we look at it, when you're driving past and you see on the hill the steeples of the main church, you think of Gothic revivalism. In truth, that is mainly a style which we find in the main buildings. The Chernham House, the lodges, the main gate. But when you then actually start wandering through the labyrinthine roads, streets in there, you will find very little which is Gothic revivalist. Mostly it is grammar, an architectural grammar, borrowed from Neoclassicism. So things such as draped urns, inverted torches, acroteria and antefixes, temple-like fronts, which take us back to sort of ancient Greek times. Those were abundant, they flourished. Mark mentioned the importance of books about decoration, pattern books and samplers that started to flourish thanks to Père Lachaise. Père Lachaise was the first, and as a result of Père Lachaise, a very seminal book was published, spread all over Europe. I found a copy in the National Library in Valletta, and perhaps, I don't know where it came from, how long it had been on the island, but there was a copy even locally. So that was very, very seminal in a way to understand that people, artists, contributors were looking, were searching for important sources of reference. Of course, as Mark clearly pointed out, with all these revivalisms, people then started to go eclectic. Okay? At the end of a century, usually a person is tired, and rather than wanting to create, they tend to borrow. And in the process of borrowing, they create an assemblage of different architectural styles. And so we find a number of these contributory styles that sometimes make up one particular chapel, one mausoleum, so to speak. One thing of note, which I realized in my studies, in my research, as you start to categorize and put things in a chronological order, which was a very essential conclusion to my work, was that in the first decades of the Addolorata century, we're talking about 1870s to roughly 1899, 1900 plus or minus, we tend to see that the predominant monument in the form of a funerary chapel was the temple-like chapel. A temple-like chapel in praise of the fallen hero. So if we see, for example, the Sir Adrian Dingley, we see attributions related to his profession in law. If we see the Galizia, we see the tools required for architecture. And if you wander around the various streets and passageways, you will see this repeated. As though we are remembering, we are bringing to mind the fallen hero. But then, with the turn of the century and the very prolific and interesting contributions of, as far as I know, by the time I stumbled across his name, he was relatively unknown, Emanuele Borch, an architect from Floriana, we suddenly find that this man was so popular, so many people commissioned funerary chapels by him, but the iconography changed entirely. And from a gabled, temple-like mausoleum, we start to see these floral, dome-like, almost church typographies, which have then included in them angels instead. We have crosses, sometimes decorating the portico lintel. We would see statues of angels and the Virgin herself, either as an Assumption or as an Addolorata. So the iconography changed. And this to me was a very revealing process, as though from a hero-centered memory, it started to change to a more Christ-centered recognition.
Thank you, Mario. Mario mentioned two terms or two types of decorations, the revivalist and the eclectic. How does the Addolorata epitomize these?
Well, as I have already said, these are the styles which were very current in the 19th century, and therefore the Maltese architects and designers engaged with these different styles. And therefore, the eclecticism is also seen in the works of.
Like you're somewhere not in water, but beyond. I think possibly this unconsciously was also.
There is also, when you enter, this segregation between the space of the living and the space of the dead. So there's that exedra, that is called in documents the arcade or terminus. And when you cross that area, so when you enter, everything is flat, the landscape is flat. And then, when you cross that, you start climbing and you start ascending. So this is like what I want to add also that the subject of the decorative arts in Malta is something pretty recent, and it is something that we are working greatly upon in the Department of Architecture and Art History at the university. I worked on the subject for my doctoral dissertation that hopefully in the coming months drove this project, which we are gradually working on. And the Addolorata Cemetery is just a small facet of the huge production of decoration, of works in silver, in embroidery, in wood carving, stained glass windows, glass, etc. But there was a huge production of decoration in different forms for churches, for especially the ecclesiastical fields. Immensely fertile, and also jewelry and private works and furniture, etc. So we are now gradually starting to chart, to map out and the development of decoration and ornament in Malta, and most interestingly is how it reflects the larger European context, which is, and Via Dolorata proves this, that Malta, despite the fact that this location is on the periphery, despite its very incredibly small size, was not half away in the 19th century from the main styles on the continent. So in funerary architecture and decoration, but not only, even in painting and sculpture and other things. So the idea, this also serves to prove that the 19th century was a tremendously important period. We still have this tendency to think that art of Malta was only the Knights of St. John, where that is clearly not the case. And this publication also serves to prove this.
What are your reactions on the extension of the cemetery? The present extension. How can you construct?
Well, I mean, the cemetery underwent a number of extensions over time. I mean, Galizia died in 1907. In 1925, there was one of the first major extensions. In fact, we, in our book, we have a very interesting aerial photograph taken from probably one of the British RAF. Basically, it's a very interesting photograph because it maps the location of the cemetery in relation to even Paula. This is the beginning of the works on the parish church of Paula by Giuseppe D'Amato. But in this case, there is the Western Division, I believe it's the Western Division. That's the area where there is the chapels of Andrea Vassallo being built. And the photograph was taken in 1927. So it represents the cemetery because obviously there is a main axis that runs all the way from the entrance to the Arcade of Tablets straight, and then symmetrically on both sides of the carriageways. We reproduce, I think maybe the PowerPoint will have the original plan by Galizia, maybe, I don't know if it's too late. We can have, there is a plan that was reproduced in the British architectural journal, the Builder, and that represents an extension and further extrapolation. So long as they at least keep the symmetrical disposition on both sides, at least that keeps the formalities. What worries me is things like there was a certain palette of materials. So you cannot have tombstones with green simulated turf, or like, for example, shiny black marble tombstones, which really are very kind of obtrusive because they're out of, and you do find them, unfortunately. Some because they jar with the rest. But those are individual things that should be better controlled. I think a bit more, because once you're there, obviously now there is the multiple highway intersection and junctions which have, in a way, kind of compromised a bit the entrance approach. But what's worse, that when you look on one side, you see this huge junkyard scrapyards. You actually see machines, literally moving around scrapyards, which is disturbing. Because you go there, seeking peace, solitude, and quiet, and you see basically this rusty junkyard over there in full operation. So things like that. Besides other things that really need to be addressed, basic furniture, street furniture, proper rubbish bins rather than rusty drums or oil tanks. Pavements need to be properly rearranged. Accessibility has to be worked upon. Unfortunately, all those of a certain age who like to visit there and have mobility issues have difficulties there. So even a proper approach from the back entrance, it's not very visually attractive from the back entrance. Hopefully, I'm not directly involved, but hopefully I know there is a consortium now that is responsible for both the extensions and the restoration. But ideally, it would be useful if powers that be give us some more information on what actually is being done and what is planned. Because we had this discussion before that some chapels and graves are totally abandoned because the line of descendants has expired, or there are no inheritors. So there has to be legislation in place to cater for the situation. We're talking in Germany, you can only own a grave for 74, 25 years, and then it's renewed. So at least maybe, I don't know, maybe this does not sound very popular, maybe for every chapel there should be an annual fee that goes towards a fund to restore the chapels all around. You never see ongoing restorations of the chapels. Now I don't know whether that's within the program of even the church itself definitely needs a lot of restoration. Parts of the church, the Alexis Church, the roof, and part of the spire are in dire condition. So definitely there has to be a very professional plan for restoration, and then as well how to promote it, both for visitors to Malta and even for locals, because I think we have a mindset which is maybe, I mean, obviously very much visited in November, rightfully, it's the month of the dead, and to pay respects to our beloved ones. But I think we can redimension it as well as a place to visit, to appreciate artistically, from an appreciation point of view. But obviously that is to come with taking care of it. Hopefully this book helps a bit in promoting, I mean, the whole purpose of this book was to make it amenable. I mean, this is not intended for academics or scholars. It's intended to educate the public, but we want as much as possible to kind of give and showcase the place so that people appreciate it more. We believe that the more you know about something, the more you appreciate it. So hopefully that's the main objective of this book.
Before the discussion comes to an end today, something which I think is due is our heartfelt thanks to the hosts today, the Hajj Museum and its management. Beyond any doubt, they go through a number of sacrifices, because all of this is voluntary. And I'm proud to say that I've been very much at home organizing events here, and I have to thank also people like Anton Bassardo, who's over there, but also James George, Mario, who I don't know, and obviously Joe George, which I'd like him to come here and say a couple of words on the museum before we conclude. Thank you, Joe.
Antoine, I think you should come over to present a small token to the speakers this morning. Thank you very much, Mario, Conrad, Mark, Joseph, also for bringing this very interesting lecture this morning. Okay?
One of our first publications for the Victoria was a deluxe edition of the translation to Maltese of Desordanis' Gozo, which has a good part about a good cemetery in Victoria, which we call Tarvanchisi, probably not exactly, but which is now non-existent anymore, because Gozo's Adorata, I don't think it has any artistic merits. Okay, I think that's but this Tranquility had chapels too. And one of the older pieces there usually is hung there, but it has to be taken away when we have election. Now, this includes details about it. It might be of interest.
Thank you very much. Thanks a lot. Thank you.
So we thank you all for coming here. These are very difficult times for the museum because we have to organize things in a very different way. Registering people who come, distancing. We're trying to continue with our activities. It's very important. The message is we have to carry on. Joseph has kindly also provided us with a very interesting conference coming in December, on the 12th of December, Saturday morning again. We'll have each of us and his new discoveries about Mattia Pirelli. Okay? At the moment, there is an exhibition going on at the museum, which we inaugurated over various sessions last Saturday. The curator of the exhibition has kindly, who is downstairs, would like to get you around the exhibition so that you can see for yourselves this very nice photography from around the world. Okay? The museum is going through difficult times and we need help. Obviously, there is a small envelope which you can help us through your donations, but also, you know, by coming over here, visiting us, and helping us out. Thank you very much.